Hey there, thanks for joining me today. This is Laura Lynn with Keep Inking Up. I'm an independent demonstrator for Stampin' Up! In San Antonio, Texas. And today I wanted to share two different tips on stamping your sentiments straight. I get a lot of questions about that, how to save paper and not waste paper by stamping crooked sentiments. So I'm going to share with you two different ways that I ensure that I can get a straight sentiment. And this works with our cling mount stamp sets. This is from the Celebrate Sunflower stamp set. It's a really pretty sentiment. I love the combination of the fonts on this. Anyway, this is a cling mount stamp set, which means that it's red rubber and you cannot see through it. If you're using a photopolymer stamp set, you can see through the stamp itself, and so it tends to be easier to line up. But the first way that I'm going to share with you is using grid paper. And you can either use the mini grid paper or our full-size 11 by 17 grid paper, it doesn't matter, or any grid paper that you happen to have around. And what I do is I take my clear block and I line up the block on the grid lines. So that's lined up, and then I'll take my stamp and look through the grid line, look through and see if I can line up the image pretty well with the grid paper. That looks pretty good. And I always like to test on my grid paper before I stamp on my cardstock. The grid paper is a lot less expensive than the quality cardstock that I'm going to use for my project, so I tend to like to do a test run on my grid paper. So I'm going to ink it up, and I'm going to line the block up with any line on the grid paper. Stamp it down, and look at that, it's nice and straight. So now I'm ready to bring in a piece of cardstock. This is just a strip of Whisper White cardstock. And this time, when I go to stamp it, I'm going to line up the edge of the block with a line of the cardstock. And that's nice and straight, so I can trim that up and put that on a project. Now another way to do this is using the Stamparatus. So I'm going to clean my stamp so I can remove it from my clear block. And I'm going to go ahead and close up my ink pad before I stick my finger in it. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And now I'll bring in my Stamparatus. And let's see, I'm going to stamp on this piece of paper here. So let me make sure this is nice and clean, though. I don't want to get ink on my cardstock. That looks a little bit better. So I'm going to place this where I think that I want it on my cardstock. I'm going to pick that up, and because there are grid lines on the plate of the Stamparatus, I can use those grid lines to see if this sentiment is nice and straight. I think that looks pretty good, but again, I want to test it. So what I have is a piece of plastic. This is from the sewing department in a craft store. It's for quilting. I don't know what it's called. I bought this so many years ago, but it comes in a pack with gridded plastic and then this clear plastic. And this is just to help me not waste paper or do a lot of cleaning on. You could stamp directly onto the Stamparatus, but I like to minimize the cleaning. So I'm going to ink up my stamp, stamp it down, and I can remove my white paper and see that that sentiment is nice and straight. It's right on that line. So now I can pull that out and stamp directly on my paper for my project. And be confident that it is nice and straight. And there it is. So there are two different ways to help you get straight sentiments when stamping. You can either use a clear block in your grid paper, or you can use your Stamparatus. So I hope you found those two tips helpful in getting straight sentiments. Thank you again so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.